Now, one of the things that people get sucked into all the time in deer management and wildlife management habitat is enrolling in government programs, and sometimes non-government programs, but a program at which, this is a do-all planting for all wildlife. And a lot of that revolves around setting aside ag land and enrolling in a program, whether it's for pheasants, CRP, where you're setting aside those crops. And I used to think that was really cool. We hunted on a property in Coon Valley since 2002. And the first couple of years are corn and alfalfa strip rotations. And then it went into CRP. And you think, well, all this grass and all these weeds is going to be a great habitat for wildlife and whitetails. And it's interesting, we hunted that property for 12 years, and I can say there's probably 3 or 4 instances in that entire time where we actually saw deer bedded out in that CRP that we actually kicked. And it was interesting, we never saw any pheasant out there in that entire time period. And on the other side where we hunt now, right next to the adjoining property, there's a little bit of areas of box elder, briars, and then just goldenrod ragweed, which was similar to the CRP mix that was up there, that had pheasant on. We would walk through that occasionally and we'd see pheasant there, and it was just a little bit more cover than that CRP mix. The bottom line is, both were kind of wasted areas, and during the winter, all of it lays down. So there's really a problem with a lot of these plantings, and we just go down the road a little ways from the house here, about a mile and a half. There's a large nearby parcel, and it's very large. But there's a field down here. It's 53 acres, just the one field. And that's just one portion of these type of plantings in the area. And I have another neighbor they've planted thousands of pheasants in those fields, and they're all dead. And it's because there's no cover. And so we're talking primarily about CRP, pheasant cover, overgrown fields. And, one of the buzzwords in the habitat industry is early successional growth. We're just going to allow the natural regeneration to take place in these fields that you set aside, or you plant it in a CRP blend or a pheasant mix, which some would say would even be better. And we're going to let nature take its way, especially with the early successional growth, and we're going to have tons of wildlife there. And this is going to be the best. This is going to be better. Well, who could argue with nature? Just let it go. Well, in those fields in Coon Valley where we hunt in Wisconsin, they've been idle and not ag since the 50s. And that's what they are, what we see. We have about 2.5 acres, 3 acres of switchgrass planted, different strips, pockets in the area, and then we have cover. There's a little bit of box elder growth in a couple spots, representing probably 2% of the field, 3%, some briars, but there's not much there. So that's an example. Let's let this go, early successional growth, and that's the high side, of course. We're talking 70 years that not much is growing out in those fields. The soil was stripped. It was poor farming practices where they used to take a plow and horse and go up the hill, step over, and then go down the hill. So you can imagine all the topsoil washed down the bottom. We find broken parts down the bottom, lots of rocks, because everything came off the hillside. And it's just an example of what not to do. And even in the best of circumstances, you're talking about 15, 20 years for that field to actually take shape and have enough cover to hold deer. And deer would probably be the most, lowest hole in the bucket, meaning they need the most cover. You could have some pockets in there that could hold some pheasants, some rabbits, and have small game cover in those locations. But it takes a lot longer if you look across a 10-acre field and have enough cover in there to actually hold whitetails. They need more cover. They need to be hidden more from the road or from neighboring boundaries, whatever it might be. And so there's always something better. And so people will turn to CRP mixes. Through a government program to get a break on their taxes, they'll turn to pheasant mixes. Or these great mixes. You have to remember it's all planted at one time with a machine. Anytime that's done, it's bad. I love switchgrass because it stands up to winters around here. But you can't have switchgrass in there just 100% because there's no forbs, forages, anything for food value for anything throughout the entire year, just switchgrass. I have a client, Bob, he's a favorite client of mine. He's down in the southeast of here, and he has about a 30-acre switchgrass field, and there are some pheasants living around the outside edge, but that entire inside 25 acres is dead. No rabbits, no pheasants. There's really nothing for them to forage on, feed on. And then for that, there's no deer in there. It's the opposite of too little cover, there's too much. And so you always have to have balance. We'll talk about what to do here in a second and how to make use of these spaces. But the problem is when it's all planted one way with one machine, it's either so much cover that there's no food value, Sure, the cover might stand up all winter long, but if there's no food value, why are the deer going to be there? No different than a big, wasted, open canopy mature hardwood forest or even a mature conifer stand. Why would the deer be in there if there's no forage for them? Same with switchgrass. On the flip side, if there's too much open area and you have good regeneration, browse, forbs, forages, different types of goldenrod, bee balm, pollinator blends, if you have a good amount of that within that mix, then you're not going to have enough cover to be sustainable and to offer sustainable cover to create populations of wildlife during the wintertime, because it all lays down and there's nothing there. And again, we're talking, right now, we're shooting this video in early January, January 2nd, and we can go by these fields right now and there's not enough cover to hold anything out there. I'm sure there's mice living, that's about it right now, but those will even be limited by the end of the year or the end of the winter, because predators from above can get those mice, coyotes, fox, whatever it might be. There's just not a lot of cover left in that field when it gets flattened with snow. And so we're early on. We have only had about 13, 14 inches of snow so far. We're not talking 40 inches of snow or 80 or 60 like a normal winter. We're talking 13, 14 inches and that field's already useless. So it's one thing, that property down there is about a total of 2,400 acres. In theory, you could say, well, they have 53 acres here, 40 acres here, 80 acres here, 60 acres here, 100 acres here that they can just afford to throw away. And throwing away is what it is. If it's only good from May, June, July, August, September, and then it starts to lay down, it doesn't offer food, if it's only good for those few months, look at someone with 100 acres, 200 acres, 40 acres, 30. Can you afford to put a high percentage of your land into wasted space that doesn't help animals for the entire year? And that's my focus. I've never looked at it like you need all switchgrass or you need all pollinator blend. You have to have balance. This stuff is dead in the winter. And if the cover is dead in the winter and there's no forage in the winter, animals can't be sustainable. You can't have a sustainable wildlife population of pheasant, rabbits, deer within these areas. Some of my biggest wasted areas I've seen, hardwood regeneration, big hardwoods, mature timber. You can always cut that, get regeneration, you can get the money from the timber out. But when you have a big field of waste, maybe some big blue stem, little blue stem, Indian grass, and you have such a high grass population or representation that'll lay down in the winter, then it offers no cover during the winter, and that's the limiting factor. It's really bad. So it's dead in the winter. If your habitat's dead in the winter, then the animals are dead in the winter. There's nothing to hold them in any way. We go down by this and we see fawns and does in that mix. We see birds, butterflies, bees. There's some flowers out there. It looks pretty during the summertime. But then it's a wasteland for 7 months out of the year, 6 months out of the year. And so really, what good is that at that point? Because the limiting factor in most areas in the north half of the country, you could probably say the north 2/3 of the country when it comes to whitetail and wildlife states, that's including a lot of area from Oklahoma to Tennessee, over to North Carolina, West Virginia, all the way up east to Maine, Vermont, New Hampshire, and then all the way over to Kansas, Colorado, Wyoming, huge, huge area. The limiting factor is not what's available in the summer. There's more than enough habitat to take care of the deer, take care of the wildlife, to have sustainable populations during the summer in most areas. But the limiting factor in all areas is during the wintertime. So when it's dead, so is the wildlife, and you don't get those wildlife back the following year. And that's what they found with planting these thousands of pheasants throughout the years in some of these locations around here, is that, of course, when they die, they're gone, and they're not going to live if the cover's laying down because it's dead during the winter. And this is something that is, I grew up hunting late 80s in the Thumb area, Michigan. 86, I think, was the first year. 87, right around there. And I remember when we'd see a flock of pheasant come up. And even then, they tell me that it was more late 70s, early 80s. They saw these big pheasant populations. And they were shrinking when I was there, but so were the amount of fence rows, brush lines, areas that weren't typically ag before. They started tiling more fields to get more money out of the field, which is fine. I have no problem with that with farming, and I love the farmers around here, but it's shrinking habitat. And that's near and dear to my heart. I love seeing pheasants. I love seeing rabbits. We're in fact, tomorrow we're putting out some rabbit houses for deer. Rabbit houses meaning pallets, putting brush over them. We'll show some of that. Maybe even in this video, we'll have it in time. But I want to have that wildlife on my property. I own my property here in Minnesota. And so we have 9 acres of switchgrass. I put a couple acres of pollinator blend in. I just frost seeded it a couple weeks ago when the ground was bare before the snow, right before the snow. So I will talk about how to do this right, but there's shrinking habitat across most of the agricultural range, and then the habitat that's being enrolled in CRP and pheasant mixes is wasted habitat too. It looks pretty. Pollinator blends during the summer, but again, the summer is not the limiting factor. The winter is the limiting factor. So a lot of these programs are very poor. I've had some several clients over the last few years pull their land out of CRP or not enroll in CRP. I have one right now, they're asking me, or need to enroll in CRP, not coming until April. And so I asked them, beg them, plead, just wait till after I'm there. At least establish a plan in place, at least this 1 acre here, 1 acre there, enroll the other 8 acres. Or I found some of the plan administrators are very flexible. They know they have shrinking acres in this type of situation. It can help somebody, but you have to do it right. If you don't do it right, you're going to have acres and acres and a high percentage of those areas in wasteland because they're not producing the type of wildlife potential that I once thought was in those areas and that my clients have as goals for their property. I always encourage people to buy less acreage and do it right than have more acreage and be forced to waste acres doing something poorly because you have to pay the taxes on the land in the first place. That's a poor investment for your time, poor investment for your goals, your wildlife goals, and I could care less. I don't want to own farmland. I want to own wildlife acres, wildlife land, even if it meant selling half my land to pay for it, to continue to pay for it. I'd rather have that and be able to do it right 100% with my land than to have these giant holes in habitat like they do over on this property nearby. But they're shrinking habitat. It is a concern. And when more people are enrolling in CRP programs and pheasant programs and not getting the return of wildlife back and not really offering anything to the wildlife in the area, that's very poor management. And it's sad. It really is sad. So what is better? And I'll just give you an example. It doesn't really matter. You know, I have an area down here and I'll try to draw it out. I know it's not exact, but it goes down. We have a road that goes by. We have a wood line down here. This is low going down this way. And then it kind of goes back up here. And we plant areas of food plots in about this area, something like that. And then the rest, we have switchgrass and pollinator blends. So we had a really good mix of switch. Right here, very well established. It'll be 6-7 feet tall. And it's all the way down in this corner complete. And it comes up here. And I would say it's something like this. We even have it along the edge here with our house right down here. I put pollinator blend in some of these areas because I want to have that mix of both, kind of that best of both worlds. And the pollinator blend, regardless of how it shows, is a little bit lower percentage. Also have switch up here along this edge here. The whole idea is I want this to be protected, this entire area. The area is surrounded in switchgrass, so we have that ultimate type of cover. I don't want to plant trees out here. I don't want the trees to shade out my switchgrass, my pollinator blends, or my food plots. But I want cover. I want pheasants, I want rabbits, I want birds, butterflies, bees. I want fireflies, whatever's out there that normally is there, hummingbirds, whatever it might be that takes advantage of that area. And those pollinators that I want out there, then I want to surround that entire area in switch, which I've done. And then I want to surround the strips of pollinator blend and our food plots in switch, which is what I've done. And so this is an example right here of about 8 acres, I would say, 9 acres that we've put into this type of blend to have the best of both worlds. We can actually have deer that bed along this edge down in the woods. Woods are on this side right here. You know, we can have woods, and then we can have this edge. It's full of deer and wildlife because they're protected behind the switch. We can even have fawning does in these areas right here. We don't plant the food plots during the summertime because I don't want to create a doe factor. I don't want does and fawns in large percentages there. They can scatter around through the field, but we will have does and fawns in there, and that's cool. I just don't want 10 times the amount that we would normally have if we put summer food out there. I want just a representation. But we will have pheasants, we already do. We will have rabbits, we already do. We're enhancing that. When we get down here on this edge, this is where we build rabbit houses. We'll probably put one about right there along that edge so we can complement. They can run into the switch, they have that cover and that woody browse that they need. along the edge. It might be that you're in your situation. It might be just a square field that you have. What you want, whether it's 10 feet, 20 feet, 30 feet wide, you want that switch to surround the field. Maybe you have a roadway right here along this edge. Maybe you need some conifers just along that edge so people can't see from the road down into this. But you need to have this outside screen. On the inside, it might be that you have pockets of switchgrass. And that means there's a lot of area left over. Whether you do this in reverse, you have pockets of pollinator blend in early successional growth, or you have pockets of switchgrass. Either way, people say, well, switchgrass is a monoculture then, but it's not a monoculture because you only have switchgrass in about 40, 50%, 60% at most of this entire space. The rest is in that pollinator blend. It's an early successional growth. It's in a mix of different types of shrubs. Use box elder seeds, the wings. They're blowing all over the top of the snow on our way out. Maple seeds, those wings that come down from red maples. Those are great. Get them on that soil, kill it, get it down to the bare soil and plant those seeds. You could have raspberries out there. Plant raspberries, blackberries. Use your imagination. Do nothing. Let it go to early successional growth. Just have the pockets of switch. That's where you have that balance because you have that ultimate cover of the switchgrass that establishes within 2 years. You can see some of this switch out right here. It's about 3 feet tall. It's going to be 6, 7 feet tall next year. We have switch right now that's standing. That's 5, 6 feet tall after the snows come through and broke off the seed heads. It's still really strong and viable and can support wildlife populations within 2 years, sometimes at the end of the first year. Dylan and I, the first year we had switchgrass, it was a 2015 planting or 2016 planting. Dylan and I were in that winter, winter of 2016-17 filming, and we had rabbit pellets out under the switchgrass. They could actually support rabbits and keep them from getting hit from above by birds of prey just in that first year of growth. So there's a lot you can do. Or if you just let this whole field go to early successional growth, which is a terrible thing to do, don't do that, then you could be 70 years out in the worst case scenario like we have in Coon Valley. That's one of the worst I've seen, and I bet you there's other areas that are even worse. But then you could have it as early as 10, 15, 20 years take shape on average. I would say 15 years on average. You'd have to let it go before it has enough solid cover. I don't want you to wait that long because you don't need to wait that long. You really don't. Just for, I don't know what reason someone would want to wait 15 years when you can wait 2. And you can even do it better at a higher degree because you can take something like this that's just 10 acres or 40 acres or 80 acres, whatever it might be. Use this formula of about 40, 50, 60% switch. Now, when you get down into Missouri, Southern Illinois, Southern Indiana, Southern Ohio, Kentucky, West Virginia, you get into that line, Tennessee, Oklahoma, you have a longer growing season and you don't have the winters that we do up here up north. So you can get away with a native grass blend that might include more of a variety. But even then, a variety of grass is still grass. Don't fool yourself that's diversity. Diversity comes from having that grass as your structure, your base, your bedding base, that base cover that's sustainable and standing. Could be that it's red cedar in some areas. You know, we're not just talking grass. We teach people in the woods to do the same thing. It might be red cedar, it might be conifers, pines, shrubs, even briars, grass, weeds. Anything that's standing all winter long that's that base form of cover. In most cases, you can do this with switchgrass in just 2 years. So that's diversity. Just because you have big blue stem, little blue stem, Indian grass, switchgrass combined, that's not diversity, it's still just grass. But when you have early successional growth pollinator blend, my pollinator blend bag that I have up in the pole building right now, and we'll get Dylan up there to film that and put it into the video, but I would guess there's at least 30 seed varieties in there, maybe 40. There's a lot of variety in there that I just frost seeded within the last couple weeks that'll pop up in the next 2 years. So I can't wait for that. But this is that formula that you're doing to do something better. And what's different with this and why do not people use this with CRP? Because it's not the latest and greatest mix. It seems like they're always fooling around and tweaking these things. Well, this is the greatest pheasant mix there is. It's ever been. We tweak this, we tweak that. They want to plant it with one machine. Just go into 10 acres, 40 acres and plant it for you. There's nothing wrong with that. But the problem is there's not enough cover. Because all of these have great blends, great varieties. But if it's laying down in the winter and it's dead, then it is nothing. Number 5, I urge you to buck tradition. What I mean by that is there's a better way than CRP. There's a better way than pheasant mixes. There's a better way than this poor management area that is, you know, we can all look at shrinking habitat. Anyone that's in ag land knows that farmers want to and need to get the most out of their acreage. That means getting rid of those 20-foot wide hedgerows that used to funnel deer. We used to have tree stands in them. They're gone. It's clean farming practices. They need to get the most out of every row, every acre. So they're shrinking habitat. And then when you take farmland and you put it into CRP mixes and pheasant mixes that lay down all winter long, you're compounding the problem. So overall, that just equals a lot of wasted acres as it relates to deer habitat and wildlife habitat. Not that that's what everyone wants, but the point is, if you want good wildlife habitat, good whitetail habitat, then you need to make sure that you find true diversity, which means a combination of both cover and then forages, forbs, might be clovers, alfalfa, goldenrods. There's different types of goldenrod, bee balm. There's different types of variety that go into these pollinator blends or early successional growth. Early successional growth, if you left pockets out in the field like that, make sure you hit the grass. Spray with a grass-specific herbicide. Get rid of the grass. Because if it's not switchgrass, it's not cover, it's not any kind of food. And if you have that solid switchgrass cover next door, meaning within the same field, within the same area, even like strips like this, and it's different on mine because I have irregular, and that's why there's no cookie cutter plans. I hate those old whitetail designs where do this and this. You try to take this and fit it on every parcel. That's not true. You know, out here we have elevation change curves to the lay of land, hidden pockets, ravines. So I can strip these plantings through there, and from one end to the other, it's completely different elevation changes around corners, diversity. It looks very irregular from above. Bottom line is, true diversity comes in the form of having great cover, separate from the early successional growth, pollinator blends that you can plant, and then watch your wildlife populations explode. I can't tell you how many clients we've taken with CRP mixes, native grass mixes that had no pheasants, no rabbits out in them, and completely transformed them with just in a few years. So they have exploding pheasant populations, rabbit populations, and of course enough cover for deer, to the point where they keep expanding their cover out within fields, away from woods, and including more of that in their deer habitat, because as that cover fills in the form of true cover like switchgrass, let alone if you're planting shrubs or conifers out there, now you have that perfect mix where you actually have sustainable cover to help creatures, animals, whitetails, all winter long, all year long. But then you have those forbs and forages and variety for food for them too, for a lot of diversity, and of course those pollinators that are so critical, especially in shrinking supplies. There's a great way to do it, folks. Again, buck tradition, get rid of some of these old management practices that are really have proven throughout the decades that they're not increasing wildlife populations in your area, they're decreasing them. They're part of the problem, not the solution. This is part of the solution. I want you to try it this year. We have clients that do this. We have a lot of readers, viewers that do this too, and they're on the right track to creating great wildlife populations, including their whitetail goals for this year and beyond. And make sure you try this out, folks, because it is a great way to manage open acres and convert fields quickly, convert open pastures quickly to awesome whitetail and wildlife holding cover and population and food sources, and being the true influencer of not only whitetails in the neighborhood, but all wildlife as well. Folks, I want to make sure you check out my web class video series, whether it's how to design your food plot program or how to design your property in general. And we have a new one coming out that'll be how to hunt the rut. But these bucks back here are a testament. Some of these bucks go back to 93. They're even in different states. I urge you to check out those web classes so that you can help yourself, help your land, help your hunt. The link is in the description. And also for those that have tried them out, I encourage you to offer some feedback in the comments below. Thank you.